Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. We go through 3 short stories, 1 big story, then wins and losses every Monday morning, so that you can start your week informed and ready to change and make impact in your communities. I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta. We hung out yesterday, and we get to hang out again today.
I know, it's been a lot.
Yeah,
we've been spending quite a bit of time together.
We had hours, at the lovely Arts Goggle. I feel like 10/19/2024 was like a historical Fort Worthian day. Like, we had like 4 events going on. Of course, Arts Goggle, which
Lost
is
in Sound.
Yeah, that was big. We had a rummage sale. And then we also had Doc's Records had their Doctoberfest, so there was a flea market and kind of a thing there. And so I was able to make it to kind of all 4.
Well, that's better than me. I went to Arts Goggle and didn't make it to any of the rest of those things, but I took the bus to Arts Goggle after walking to the bus stop from my house, and it dropped me off right at Magnolia and 8th Avenue. And I got there right at noon, the very beginning.
Yep.
Did a little walk around. I had some negotiations with my less social husband about kind of when we would go and when he would go so that I could get in all the time I wanted to get in. So I went by myself first, ran into a bunch of other people. Ale, who we had on the pod, she and I hung out for a bit. And then Jim came, and then we ran into you all. And
yeah, it was awesome.
And then I went home and charged my phone because it was dead. And then I came back again. And then we hung out some more. So.
Yeah, it was awesome. And we're going to talk about Arts Goggle here on short story number 1. And basically the idea of this is the conversation we're going to have on short story number 1 is how do we turn the best day in Fort Worth to every day in Fort Worth? Because we believe when Arts Goggle is here, it's truly the best representation of the city. But before we get there, guys, I believe this episode is going to be a very important episode. We have a huge announcement to share with you guys from a podcast update that you want to know about. We also have in my win column an update about Mercy Culture. We are going to talk about a ton of things. Obviously, today is also the beginning of early voting, so that's kind of giving you short story number 2. We have transportation updates. But then this big story is all about the people we've been trying to keep people informed about, and that is our county leadership, both at the jail and in the commissioner's court. So strap in. We have a full episode to get to, but let's just start talking about Arts Goggle, and you've seen it grow over time. What makes that day so special, and like how can we make that day every day in Fort Worth?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer to how do we make that every day in Fort Worth. I think that what prompted that comment from you was a kind of a sad comment that I made yesterday about how inspiring it was to see the diversity of people that turn out for that day and the artists that are represented. And, with Lost in Sound going on too, that was all music that is going on in our community, a lot of local musicians. And it just shows overwhelming camaraderie and support for people of all walks of life and all differences of just everything. And it was lovely. And I think I made a comment about how I had given birth to 2 Texans who have left the state and are hesitant to even come back and visit because of some of the things that are not very well supported here. And that if they could see Arts Goggle, that would make them more willing to come be here again. And so I think that made you and Monica a little sad that I said that my kids won't come visit me, which is not, I go visit them, so it's fine. But I too would like their home, the place of their birth, to be a place that they want to come back to. And their response when I point out what happens at Arts Goggle is, yeah, that's near Southside, Mom, on one day.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of led to our conversation about how do we make
and
Fort Worth every day. Because it is Fort Worth every day. It's just those, many of those people came from probably further flung places than just Fort Worth. There was an art booth there that we participated in that were having people crumple up colored pieces of paper and put them in a Fort Worth or a Dallas, and they had the opportunity to do a photo shoot with your either Dallas or Fort Worth signage and swag and stuff. And There were quite a few people that put their crumpled up colored paper in the Dallas side, which is fine. I'm all for all of us coming together. So,
And I think, I mean, I don't know if I've ever really told you the story of when me and Monica really made Fort Worth. The reason why we were really interested in it is because we came to Arts Goggle and we were like, whoa, this feels like what, I mean, that was my first one, maybe 2017, 2018, I think. I don't know, but it was a while ago. But I remember saying, like, man, this reminds me of when, like, Austin before Austin was Austin, like, in the sense of, like, man, a bunch of proud people who love where they're from, who welcomes everybody, and everyone's kind of creative, expressing themselves, celebrating expression, celebrating creativity. And we, like you said, Fort Worth has that. We have great museums, we have great people, but we're so spread out. And what Arts Goggle really does is just creates that urban density for one day for Fort Worth to feel so grand, and I think, like, it's, imagine if, like, every other day, the only time it's that crowded in Fort Worth is in the stockyards, and it's tourism going to see the stock shows and the stockyard energy of Fort Worth. And it's like, this is the one day where, everyone's gathering, not to see a cattle drive, but an art drive of local people doing cool stuff. And I feel like, I think about how we make it every day is how we carry ourselves. I mean, I wore a Kamala shirt to it, and I'm nerdy like that in the sense of I wore a Kamala shirt because the day before I was seeing data on how Donald Trump was getting men of color votes, and as a man of color, I wanted to wear a Kamala shirt to hopefully be like, no, people of public, we can go against the data and change minds. And so, I think this pod is going to be all about our responsibilities, not about just being voters, but people who exemplify what Arts Goggle does every day. And
I can already hear the heads of the poor near Southside team exploding when we say we want Arts Goggle every day, when we know how much effort and energy goes into creating that event. They clearly cannot have that event every day. So please relax. Yeah. That's not what we're asking of you.
We're talking about the feeling and the culture that all of us can carry, that it just, I feel like Arts Goggle fills that bucket for all of us, but we need to see another great, example of that is just like, we had, we took our dog to the rummage sale, and there was this kid, with special needs there. He was an older guy, but you could just tell he was fixated on our big Rottweiler, and he was just like, and I went up to him, was like, you want to pet her? Here's a treat. And he was terrified to give her a treat because I guess he was scared. But then the dad kind of took it and fed the dog, and I wasn't doing anything. I was just being a friendly Fort Worthian. And the dad kind of pulled me aside, like, really later. It's like, hey, thank you for that. Like, you included my son, and, like, you saw who he was, and, like, you weren't afraid to talk to him or, invite him to, connect with you and your wife and your dog. So it's like, I think, like, Fort Worth, and when we talk about equity, we talk about inclusion, when we talk about y'all means all, it's like, that friendliness we talk about Fort Worth, but how do you add consciousness on, like, what are our systems doing and not doing to allow that to more happen is, I think, how we need to figure out how we do that every day, which goes with transportation. It goes with economic development. It goes with how we vote and think of people who are in jails and people who are running businesses. So there's an array of, like, how we can make Arts Goggle a part of our regular lives.
Right. And I think, you spoke to the nerdy side of you and the nerdy side of me when you said things like, oh, that density that is in that area, that mixed use walkable environment. I have pictures on my phone from the day of blocks that had tallish buildings, and we're not even talking tall buildings. We're just talking tallish buildings, because I wanted to highlight how the environment for folks walking up and down the street and for the artists that were on the blocks that had those tallish buildings, that they had more shade during the day. And so often zoning cases will come through and people will be resistant to or say they don't want those tallish buildings. And I'm highlighting, like, what that does positively for the environment in a mixed use walkable area. So,
and it's those little things like that. I think, like, it's, and I think, like, we just have to be, I almost think of it in the sense of like everything we do as people, um, marketing and economics make it look like you're a consumer to things. But no, every single one of us is an investor. And you need to go from a consumer mindset where you're just buying things for yourself or emotionally, but not being cognizant. So that goes from consuming a house. That goes from consuming where you eat a meal. That's consuming of where you buy your art. That's consuming of where you buy your clothes, and where you associate with. And I think what makes someone a consumer to someone who has an investor mindset is realize everywhere you swipe your card, you're investing in the thing that you're swiping your card for. And that is the same where you put your house, where you go to eat, all of those things. And I think that's how I think you can make Fort Worth more feel like that every day, is that our actions, not just at Arts Goggle, needs to be actions of, that's when we act progressive and supportive of progressive things. We can do that every day. And that's how you kind of mold behavior and changing the, I don't know, I guess the Fort Worth that only stills hold to the stockyards the other 364 days of the year. Cool, we're going to move into the next thing you need to know, and that is short story number 2, and that is it's voting, beautiful people. Today, if you're listening to it on Monday, is the first day of early voting. We record on Sunday, but I know my wife has literally said to me, we have Arts Goggle. We're going to Costa Rica for a wedding on Tuesday. She said to me, I'm so excited. And I was like, oh, you excited for Arts Goggle? She goes, no. I'm like, oh, you excited for Costa Rica? She goes, no. She's like, I'm excited to go early vote first thing when I wake up. And I was like, you're amazing. And so I need y'all to be excited. We saw Georgia turn out on the first day of early voting. I need you guys to understand voting isn't open. Let's make this happen. And so we have some dates and locations, but any kind of tips or tricks you have for early voting? I know you said it's kind of difficult here sometimes because the times are not the same.
Yeah, I think that this time around, there's some days that are not 7 to 7. In the past, I think there's been like multiple days, 7 to 7, unless maybe it's the weekend. But I think the very first week, there's some 8 to 5. We're going to post in the show notes a link that shows all the early voting locations and the times. So just know that they're not exactly the same every day and that you should check before you go, because we don't want you to be frustrated and decide not to vote, because that would be a really bad thing. But we had this similar conversation at my house about early voting on the first day, because my husband's leaving for Brazil on Monday night. And I said, you're going to vote before you go, right? And he was like, yes. So we're both planning to vote first thing tomorrow morning or Monday morning as well. And so we hope to run into a lot of you out there at the polls. It's funny. I always voted on election day before I was on a ballot myself. And then I realized all of the energy and effort that goes into following up with regular voters that are on the rolls, having voted in the past, to make sure that they get to the polls. And so candidates and campaigns are working really hard to make sure that people get out to vote. And if you don't vote, they're going to continue to contact you and text message you and send you things to tell you to remind you to go vote. So I'm doing it just to stop getting all those text messages.
I know. I can't wait to that as well. And, we have this big stories about our extremism leaders. I'm going to even push you guys, right? I think we need to be extreme voters. And what that means is I think it's kind of a 3-tier of how I qualify what's an extreme voter. One, you're going to vote, right? Vote down ballot, right? You're going to vote down ballot for progressive ideas or things that align with you. Then number 2, I actually think is you're going to bring someone else. Be an extreme voter. Bring someone else who maybe wasn't going to vote. That, kid, family member, colleague over lunch to go with you, right? And then number 3 is what this whole story is about. Make sure everyone in Fort Worth knows who represents them and what their record is. There should be no Fort Worthian anymore who doesn't know who Bill Waybourn or Tim O'Hare is. Every single person, and that's going to be our big story. But as you said about dates, Monday, October 21st to November 1st, you have early voting times from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. On Saturday, October 26th, the polling locations will be open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. On Sunday, October 27th, will be open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Then from October 28th to November 1st, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. I also have some interesting data around voting of why this is important, Texas, because Texas, we like to brag and say that we're big timers and everything's big in Texas. But it's not big in Texas is our voting turnout. We are 40th of 50 states when it comes to voter turnout. We have 19.5 million Texans eligible to vote. And in 2022's general election, 42% of those went out and voted. And so I was diving in through some of the history and what makes Fort Worth in Texas such a low place of turning out. I was looking at this story that was in the Dallas Morning News, and there's a couple things that really piqued my interest. Number one, states with same-day registration, meaning that allows people to register on the day, on average have a 5 to 7% more voter turnout, simply by not making it how you have to do it twice. The other fascinating thing I saw on here, which I didn't know, and I'm like, if I don't know this and this is my wheelhouse, surely everyone else doesn't know, and that is there is a decade-long law around how high schools in Texas are required to have 2 days of the year reminding their students to register to vote when they qualify, and that the principal is supposed to be a voter registrar in the state of Texas. This is a state law. And for someone who lives in this place, who went to a Texas high school, I did not know this until Sunday today recording this pod. So
I was today years old.
I was today years old when I found that out. And so I'm going to put the link to this story into the pod so you could just read it yourself. This was a Dallas Morning News article in the front of the Dallas Morning News Sunday paper. And so to me, those are things that are fascinating as well. Then obviously the other big thing is that Texas doesn't allow us to do is to have vote by mail. They have specifications of voting by mail. You have to be 65 or older, have a disability, maybe pregnant. There's just little nuances that allows you to
I think
be an
if
early
you're
voter.
out of state, like for school, you can. But even that, I think there's some indication that they decide how far away is too far away. Because I saw some, and this is based on stories that people have told on their social media, that one person had a child that was like in Waco, and that person had been denied a vote by mail ballot, whereas their other child was further away, and they were waiting to hear if they were going to get denied or not. And somebody said, well, maybe it's because they don't think Waco is too far to drive. I think that if you're away at school, but I know a lot of people who are having their kids come home just to make sure that they can vote. And it's interesting because yesterday I received a text message from my youngest child that said that they had received a opportunity to register in California, where they live now, where they have not registered yet, but they haven't been voting here either. But they were reached out to register, and I think that's just another indication of wanting people to vote versus not.
The state that has the number one is Oregon, which is 20% higher than Texas.
And I think they vote 100% by mail. I think everybody is sent a mail-in ballot.
Everyone can mail in their ballot.
Yep.
And that in their state culture is that's
everybody
what they do.
Just does that.
Yeah, and to me, I wonder the cost savings of that. Like, don't have to have the physical spaces as much, and it just seems like a very efficient and effective way to do it anyways. So those 3 things are reasons, but I clearly wanted to make sure the role of high schools. And the paper ended up continue to say that even though that this high school decade-old law that requires to distribute voter registration applications and that requires principals to be deputy voter registrars, its research shows that there's low compliance to this. And so I just think that's, one, surprising that this is a Texas law. And they seem to show that urban school districts are doing this. I remember actually being in Lancaster ISD, which is one of our school districts, and I heard on the intercom, they said, vote in the library to register. And I was like, I text the superintendent, like, thank you for doing good work here and informing your kids. But I don't know how common that is across Dallas ISD, Fort Worth ISD. Do we actually make it available for kids to register? And it shows that if a kid votes when they're 18, their first time, they most likely become forever voters.
Yeah.
And that's what we want in America.
And my only experience during the times that I was in campaigns was an invitation that I received from the League of Women Voters, who had set up a registration at Southwest High School. And those that were eligible were coming into a room there, and they asked me to come just as someone who was on a ballot, because they thought that would be exciting to the kids to meet someone who would be on the ballot that they would be voting on in their first election. But I don't know how much other high schools in Tarrant County are doing that. But like you said, clearly it was a surprise to me about the principal having to be the registrar.
I know, yeah.
And it might be a little surprise to some of the principals out there.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Well, now we're going to, what's cool about these short stories is we wanted to keep them light and positive, because this big story it's been carrying weight, I feel like, on this episode for a long time. I feel like we've been every episode just feeling like we leave in a negativity and disappointment, and, Anne's, going to California for another trip, and we're
scaring everybody.
Yeah, we're leaving for vacations. But anyways, I say, right, we started with story number 1, Arts Goggle. How do we make the best day in Fort Worth every day in Fort Worth? Step number 2 is go vote, right? Become extreme voter. Vote early, bring someone with you, and also make sure everyone knows who's representing them. Now, number 3, this is a fun update around transportation and how there's just seems to be some updates there. And so, Anne, take it away.
So there is a Fort Worth Report article entitled "Fort Worth Poised to be a Major Hub for National Rail Travel. Will the Pieces Fall into Place?" And I think this does kind of bring together a lot of the things that we've touched on previous pods around transportation. We've talked about high-speed rail. We've talked about the mayor's urban rail committee that is looking at ways to connect kind of the entertainment districts in the urban core of the city in ways other than everybody having to drive their cars. And this is basically talking about how Fort Worth and the Dallas-Fort Worth region could become a national rail hub. The article goes into how there is already a north-south train for Fort Worth, the Amtrak Heartland Flyer, which goes to Oklahoma City, but that there's other connections that could happen that could broaden this, and that the Biden administration has designated new funding to support all of this. And so there's initiatives that could and it makes perfect sense. I mean, we're right in the middle of the country. So to have these connections come through Dallas-Fort Worth would make total sense. So there's an opportunity that exists, and this could be a huge... seems to be very much supported by our mayor, which ties into the fact that she has put together this urban rail committee as well. But the quote in this article is, "The opportunity that could exist there would be a huge for our economy." Fort Worth Mayor Maddie Parker told the Fort Worth Report, describing how the expanded national rail network could vastly strengthen North Texas's region's economy and cultural links to other cities. With the amount of growth that we're seeing in North Texas, we have to embrace the opportunity for passenger rail. So I was trying to decide whether this was going to be like a story or whether it was just going to be my win, because literally this is all very winning in my opinion. But they talk about the Texas Rail Advocacy Group, which I've been going to their conferences for years and years and years. And they're saying that they're a Dallas-based nonprofit. They formed 25 years ago, and they're advocating for expanding passenger rail in the nation's second largest state. He calls it critical in a first step in a long process, and it would require a lot of cooperation of local and regional and state entities. So I think we're all very hopeful that this will happen, but it's going to continue to need advocacy and support. The North Central Texas Council of Governments is, on board for what we've talked about in the past with the high-speed rail between Dallas and Fort Worth. Another project that has seen support by both former Mayor Betsy Price and current Mayor Parker is a stretch along Interstate 20 corridor from Fort Worth through Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama that would ultimately connect Fort Worth, Dallas metropolitan region to the megacity of the Southeast, Atlanta. Fort Worth is also central to proposed long-distance routes that have been advanced through the regional working group of the Federal Railroad Administration and are expected to be submitted to Congress later this year. And at least 4 of these routes originate or end in Fort Worth, Dallas, Arlington, linking the nation's 4th largest metropolitan area with destinations or points of origin in Miami, New York, San Francisco, and Atlanta. So as much as I'm constantly talking about public transportation in Fort Worth, taking buses, taking TexRail to the airport, I think somebody suggested that when people ride TexRail, they should hashtag I'm pulling an Aunt Zeta. And I'm very flattered by all of that. And it's lovely. And I'm glad that more and more people are jumping on board, literally.
Yeah.
But I think that this is, this article goes back into our rail history as well. And we have a history going back to the 1870s with a map showing rail coming into Fort Worth in a way that we seem to be now talking about again.
Yeah, I guess that's a great point because you talk about just rail. It was I think railroads right back in those days, Fort Worth played pivotal time in that time of when railroads was the way we got across the country. So that I love that vision, but also a nod to the past. Yeah.
And so I've been continuing to serve on the Urban Rail Committee, and we're studying, that at the city level and making sure that people understand kind of the importance of connectivity via things other than everybody driving their cars. I think that hopefully those conversations will continue. I've mentioned to you, and I've mentioned, I think, on the pod several times that Community Design Fort Worth is taking up a transit initiative that ties in these things as well. And I think there's going to be an article coming out in a local publication next month in November about transportation and transit. And hopefully we'll be having kind of a get together around that and kind of continuing to advocate for transportation other than driving in Fort Worth, Texas.
And that was another cool thing about Arts Goggle. They did a ton of different things to make it easier and flow to show how we can also use the bus to get around.
Yeah, when I shared that I had ridden the bus, of course, one of the very first comments back was, oh, yeah, that's smart because it's impossible to park, which it's not impossible to park because everybody else that I met up with down there parked. And I gave them my tips about where they should park and still not have to struggle. And they all found parking places within a couple of blocks. And then somebody mentioned, well, we walked from our house, which in Fairmount, which is about 4 blocks away, which is totally doable and fine. But if we were going to go somewhere and park and had to walk 4 blocks to where we were going, we probably would be annoyed about that. Everybody should think about that because literally you don't have to park directly in front of every single thing that you visit. And I understand the heat. Everybody always talks about the extremes that make it challenging, but you're right. And that's not every day. That's not every day. And when it's nice out, we should all take advantage of it.
Yeah. Nice weather every day would make it easier to have Arts Goggle every day.
There are places that have that.
Yeah. Not in Texas.
We are visiting them.
Cool. Well, guys, those were our 3 short stories. We talked about Arts Goggle, we talked about voting, and we talked about the great bipartisan movement and just energy around Texas taking public transportation seriously so that we can continue to just be great cities for great people who are moving here.
I did have one more thing that I was going to tag on to this story because it is transit related. So there was an announcement by TexRail that they are enhancing their schedule. So Trinity Metro's railroad is now, TexRail is now offering an enhanced schedule starting on November 3rd. Beginning Sunday, November 3rd, they're going to increase to 30-minute headways during the middle part of the day. So there's been a part of the day in the middle that had switched to every hour. And so in order to keep this revenue neutral, they have eliminated some of the early morning and late trains. But they have made up for that in order to accommodate the folks that take TexRail for working at the airport to make sure that that's still something that can be done. But there'll be every 30-minute service. The first trip starting at 4:13 in the morning with 30-minute frequency continuing all the way through until 6:43 in the evening. And the night train will be an hourly service with the last one leaving at 10:43. So I think this is fantastic. Keeping things as frequent as possible is always better for transit.
Love it. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and move into the big story, which is I feel like this week was one of the first real weeks where people were messaging us like, are y'all going to talk about this? I can't wait to see what you guys have to say about this. And so really, what we're going to talk about is the full updates around like what's going on in the Tarrant County jails. Also, Tim O'Hare is now on national watch because the first national story that we are aware of about Tim O'Hare as the Fort Worth commissioner has hit social media and hit websites through ProPublica, which syndicated Texas Tribune's long, thorough Tim O'Hare story. And what I loved about it, as a group, as two co-hosts who've been talking about Tim O'Hare for the last 18 months, it's cool to see national or state people jump in to talk about a local story to now give it to more eyeballs outside of just, our podcast or our local news is about for Fort Worth. Now people across the state of Texas and across the country. I had people who I've told about Tim O'Hare or told about our podcast messaging me and like, oh, you weren't lying about your county. Look, I live in California and I'm reading, I follow ProPublica and they have the news about Tim O'Hare. So we're going to talk about how we believe that Tim O'Hare is going to become even more and more national news because people are going to be jaw-dropped that a county the size of us allows someone like him to get away with what he's getting away with, and we still have a long time before he can be seated. So who knows what else is in store. Then Bill Waybourn and the leadership at Texas County Jail, there's each one of these stories could have been the big story. So we have a lot to talk about, but my main goal for you guys today, it is no longer we are no longer being proper Fort Worthians if we're talking to a Fort Worthian and they don't know who Bill Waybourn or Tim O'Hare is. I believe that after today, if you're a listener, you need to be conscious and cognizant to inform Fort Worthians about the leaders who are really crushing the potential of this county. And so that's the big synopsis as we about to navigate 6 stories pretty much around this topic. So the first one we're going to dive into, and it makes it complicated because there's different types of reports, different things happening. So we're going to try to do our best to navigate it. But first there was an NBC report by Keenan Willard, NBC5. It says DOJ report sheds light on conditions inside of Tarrant County Jail amid criticism over inmates' deaths. A new report from the U.S. Department of Justice reviewed conditions and procedures at the Tarrant County Jail. The Institute of Corrections at DOJ visited jail in May at the request of Sheriff Bill Waybourn. The report comes amid concerns activists over custody deaf jails. For months, the Tarrant Jail has been surrounded by controversy. The county leaders told NBC5 that since 2017, 66 people have died in the jail. That is the third highest in the state. But what we're going to see is the findings. The author of the report from the DOJ says, quote, several practices meet and may even exceed national standards of care, end quote. Then it quotes again, the facilities were all quite clean as compared to the vast experience of the TA review team in assessing jail settings. The audit highlighted concerns, saying the jail needed to increase staffing amid 180 current vacancies. The jail facility and housing units should be remodeled, and staff need to start conducting new health checks on inmates 10 to 14 days after intake. Now they're back in the quotes. Quote, the greatest concern and area of improvement is related to the restricted conditions of confinement for those identified as having significant assessment and treatment needs, such as those at risk for suicide, those detoxing, and those on mental health recommended single cell status. They experience confinement for 23 to 24 hours per day and may have further restrictions to assessing some personal items. Quote, appropriate changes would involve formalized levels of suicide watch, constant observation, and staggered observation that do not simply restrict an individual to a cell and limits items that would provide opportunities to improve one's mental health, reduce distress, and allow interactions with others, including more private reassessment and treatment settings. So, then Waybourn is really touting this article. My hope is that the majority of good people that read this will see the good things that we're doing, see the suggestions that have been made, and know that we're doing what we should be doing, end quote. So from an article, this is one where I think Bill Waybourn tried to get on the offense and say, hey, I'm going to invite the DOJ to come to our jail for 3 days. This was written in a positive, like, hey, there's some things we need to improve on, but overall, we're meeting the needs. I won't read the whole article, but there's other people saying this doesn't mean you're meeting needs. This is one author. You knew they were coming for 3 days. You're on your best behavior to make this work. And we have several news that shows that that goes against this report. But as I stop here, and what was kind of your take on reading this article? And
so, when we were discussing it before we started recording, you highlighted the paragraphs that said of greatest concern and areas that could be improved. And I think that what jumped out at me was they experience confinement for 23 to 24 hours per day and may have further restrictions to access of some personal items. And then they refer to it as
reduction in single cell status.
Yeah, reduction in the single cell status and culture would allow for more opportunities for normalization and treatment. And single cell status is basically isolation.
Yeah, a fancy way.
Which I think that if people are in isolation, that's going to lead into, more mental health struggles. And so I think instead of saying, look, this report pointed out things that we're doing at, level with other places or maybe slightly better, dive in more to what you're going to do to address the things that are clearly being pointed out as a problem. And those things are tied directly to what might cause a death in the jail. Yeah. Whereas the other things I don't think are causing people to die.
And that's where County Commissioner Elisa Simmons was saying, calling this "we've been cleared by the Department of Justice" is not accurate. Points of view or opinion stated in this document are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. And the other part here is...
And the article does have the full report, which I didn't read the full report,
Yep.
So it'd be interesting to read that full report and see.
Yep. All in all, this is like the beginning of like, okay, great now, but like let's kind of dive into the other stories that kind of go against us. So story number 2 is this was about state law and state expectations in the Fort Worth report written by Miranda Suarez and Emily Wolf. State says Tarrant County violated law requiring independent jail death investigations. So the Tarrant County Sheriff's Office listed Fort Worth Police Department as an independent investigator of jail deaths since at least 2021. But the police never investigated those deaths. Instead, a police reviewed only the internal investigation conducted by the sheriff's office itself, an apparent violation of state law, according to the state's jail oversight body. The lack of oversight, first reported by Bolts Magazine, means that more than 20 in-custody deaths were never investigated by an outside entity. The state jail agency did not realize that Fort Worth police weren't actually investigating until being contacted by a reporter. The commission has since contacted Tarrant County and told officials to fix the problem. There's much more into this story, but as I stop there, what is your kind of initial things you want to let people know?
So I think that this also ties back to, would any of this have ever even come to light if it hadn't been for those folks that kept showing up at the county commissioners' meetings to express their concern? Because clearly the sheriff didn't invite the DOJ in until they had done that for months and months and months. And clearly no one knew that this whole claiming that the Fort Worth Police Department investigation was the required investigation from an outside agency was a thing or a problem until a reporter asked a question. So what jumps out to me is just the importance of being aware, paying attention. And I think at one point when we were kind of sorting through the articles and what we were going to call the big story, I jotted down in my notes, pay attention, wake up, be bolder. And I think that this just highlights that is necessary in order to make sure that people are doing their jobs correctly.
Yeah. And so the Sandra Bland Act, signed into law by Governor Greg Abbott in 2017, requires independent law enforcement agencies to investigate every in-custody death. A sheriff office can conduct its own investigation, but it does not replace an independent investigation. My other take around this is, like, to me, like, I think that we have, I mean, everyone knows this. If there's progressives who we want. There's people who want to defund the police. There's people who want to keep them more accountable. But the take is, to me, is like the culture. The culture is like to allyship, meaning like no one is going to tattletale on the other. And it's more a culture around, oh, we're on the same team. And if you keep someone accountable, you're now an outsider. And so, like, I just don't get, like, why Fort Worth PD was put in the position to literally keep someone accountable. That's almost like a near peer, like a near, like, relatable culture. Like, and it was just like a bunch of, oh yeah, like, I just don't think, like, it's just tough to make it. Like, I believe it needs to be an outside party who's not involved in the police law enforcement culture to be required to do stuff like this. Or you get this kind of nepotism, like, oh, we're on the same team, yeah, whatever, I'll sign it, yeah, cool, like, I'm not going to actually check on you and make sure you're doing your stuff. Hey, all's cool over here, we're just check marking this little state law box. And that's bad. And that, to me, that culture piece is the part that I think is the problem, the biggest problem in our jail systems, is just the internal cesspool of we're kind of this mob mentality of we're going to, hey, handshake, we're on the same team, we're going to cover each other's asses rather than improve our environments.
It's basically, I mean, there's a quote in here, you're not supposed to be investigating yourselves.
Yeah. And that's what it kind of, it's like, so where's the actual accountability? So like you said, is it the people have to be the people keeping the jail accountable, because not even the department down the street is going to keep them accountable when asked to. So going to the third story on the jail, then what happens, right? This one's about actual whistleblowers. And to me, this article by Cody Copeland in the Fort Worth Star-Telegram was the most, like, concerning of the articles, because these are about fired deputies who were whistleblowers who basically got boxed out for them trying to say and stand up to what they were seeing inside the culture. So former Tarrant County Sheriff's deputies denounced what they called patterns of misconduct and a culture of failing to act on such complaints in the office during a press conference on Wednesday. Brandon Walker, Philip Hill, Nyla Coleman said they were terminated from sheriff's office for filing complaints against fellow employees for conduct including drug use, misuse of official resources, and racial discrimination. All three had filed lawsuits in federal and state courts in response to the retaliation they said they experienced. The Tarrant County Sheriff's Office, in a statement, that it would be, quote, inappropriate to speak about those cases until they have worked their way through the courts. Now, let's talk about each of these people's situation that they brought up. Brandon Walker, while assigned to narcotics team from 2015 to 2017, said he witnessed his partner, Jay Rotter, use narcotics on duty. Rotter was convicted of fatally shooting his girlfriend in Denton, August 2020. Quote, I believe that if Tarrant County Sheriff's Office has taken my concerns seriously, Leslie Hartman might still be alive today. He then goes on and saying that after filing his complaint, Walker said he was retaliated against, including being called racial slurs, being transferred, and no longer allowed overtime. These constant cover-ups, retaliations against those who have integrity, is another big issue. Let's go ahead and talk about Philip Hill now, former Sheriff Deputy Philip Hill, who also described retaliation after taking action against him reporting what he called a pattern of lawlessly misusing law enforcement resources. While assigned to the Fugitive Warrants Division, Hill said he witnessed a supervisor favoring bond forfeiture warrants, which is a little bit questionable because that is the only type of warrant we serve that has to do with an issue of money. Somebody's getting paid when these warrants are being served. is what he says. He says the supervisor built a personal relationship and gave his personal phone number out to bail bondsmen, who are the ones who profit when a bond forfeiture warrants is executed. The bondsman would contact the supervisor on his phone, and sheriff deputies would be then dispatched to execute the warrant. Thus, the county's resources in the form of personal and equipment were being diverted to a personal use and for a for-profit venture. While there's nothing illegal about executing a bond forfeiture warrant, Hill said he questioned the frequency which those type of warrants were being chosen, as well as the location of the subjects. Quote by Phillip, "I never once saw this practice employed in cities like Southlake or Colleyville or Keller. Quote, every time I observed this practice being done, it was in Stop 6. It was in Southside Fort Worth. I think what I'm going at here is pretty obvious for anybody. The practice disproportionately affected minority populations. Bondmen were at a time allowed into people's homes, which he said violates the Fourth Amendment protection from unreasonable searches. It also violated a statute in the Texas Penal Code prohibiting public servants from abusing the power of their office." That to me is the biggest one here. When is enough enough? We can no longer have apathy in Fort Worth and Tarrant County that, oh, this is just how Fort Worth and Texas is. Bill Waybourn needs to be held accountable. Tim O'Hare needs to be held accountable. Change needs to happen. This should hurt our ears hearing what we're saying right now. This comes from someone, a deputy sheriff, who was in there, who now has the heroicness to say something. Let me go to Nyla Coleman. Nyla Coleman said she experienced retaliation from her supervisors after filing a complaint, but could not give details due to ongoing litigation. Called racial slurs. And this doesn't count. We also have the Anthony Johnson case, which we told you had 15 other jailers on that list. We have the Chastity Bonner case. Guys, there is so much going on against how Tarrant County runs its systems, and things have to be changed. That's why I think if you're going to not just be a voter, you need to be an evangelizer talking about what has happened in our jails and what are happening to our people, and people who are trying to do the right thing. So that's just kind of part one of Big Story. Do you have kind of any thoughts or comments you want to make?
I mean, the only response in this article from the sheriff's office was a statement that said the press conference was, quote, nothing more than political grandstanding by those with an axe to grind, noting that Waybourn's opponent, Democratic Patrick Moses, was present at the presser. I just think that's ridiculous. It's like basically saying, dismiss everything that you have just heard because there's an election going on right now and somebody's running against me. I don't think that dismisses everything that these people have to say.
Yeah, and sorry that Patrick Moses is showing up for your officers who are trying to do the right thing while you're showing up for Kyle Rittenhouse and Nick Fuentes. Okay, so that's what a good sheriff is supposed to do. So again, extremism is in our leadership. We've had it for a long time. We've talked about it. And now kind of transitioning. We're getting off the Bill Waybourn has to go. We have to make sure that people are aware of the inappropriateness that is our jail system. We're going to now move to Tim O'Hare, which is now, I believe, thank God to journalism, there is starting to be a national stage for what Tim O'Hare is doing. And so this is a Texas Tribune article written by Robert Downen and Jeremy Schwartz with ProPublica. It says, in Texas' biggest purple county, this far-right Republican is creating a playbook for local governing. From cutting social services to changing election rules, Tarrant County Judge Tim O'Hare has pushed his agenda with an uncompromising approach. ProPublica has posted this on Instagram, on TikTok, on all the things, and this is becoming a viral conversation. We talked about how Texas is the largest minority state in the country under conservative leadership and management. Tarrant County is the largest county that is a majority minority county under conservative leadership. So again, we are the epicenter of all the things that are happening, from hiding nepotism and the poor cultures in our jails to now also trying to dismantle different parts of the education system. Now, I don't know if I want to get into the entire article here because this is a long article. And basically, this article is just a reflection of all the things we've talked about for 18 months in one article.
It highlights things that if people maybe had been more aware of them, that maybe there would have been a different outcome in the first election for our county judge. Because it goes back 2 decades and talks about how in previous roles of elected office, he has cost cities that he has represented $8 million. And some of that city is still kind of trying to climb out from under the $8 million it cost because he tried to implement a law that would racially discriminate against Hispanic people. And I don't know that people were talking about that much back when that was happening. And it means that you just truly need to do your research and find out who it is that you're voting for. And this is what makes me understand people who maybe feel the need to not vote in an election that they don't know all the details about. And sometimes even we, as people who immerse ourselves in this information and read all of these things, I don't know all the details of every single race. And so it takes a little bit of effort and energy to look into people's backgrounds and positions on policy to determine whether they will be a good representative of you or not.
Yeah. And yeah, to give that, to me, that was the best part of the article. Is them going to his pass at Farmers Branch. It says, O'Hare stepped down as mayor in 2011. 3 years later, after the Supreme Court declined to hear the city's appeal, Farmers Branch stopped defending the ordinance. It was never enforced.
It was an ordinance that said you could not rent to people who were not citizens.
Yeah. And it was, the related lawsuit cost the town $6.6 million since 2016. After leaving the office, O'Hare moved his family a few miles away to Tarrant County, where the demographic changes had dropped the share of the white residents from 62% of the county's population to 43%. So that kind of led him to now take the same practices. And if you look at what happened, Girls Inc., right? There's one example of being discriminatory. The whole college ban voting, like the fact that Manny Ramirez had to have a pulse and do the right thing. Look at the property tax situation. Look at JPS. I mean, there are things they don't believe that county hospitals should be something taxpayers should be paying for. They are doing all that they can to really dismantle the government of our county. And that is he's here for a while, 2026, 2027. This guy is going to be here for a while. And so it's so important for us to build around him people who are going to keep him accountable. And so he's also probably going to try to gerrymander some of our commissioner seats because he doesn't like people who disagrees with him. And now he has that Tarrant Appraisal District Board that has all of his minions who he endorsed won and run that seat. So I just think the reason why we're talking about it today is this is such a big deal where now it's national news. Again, I am not against people who vote for Republicans. I am not if you voted for normal Republicans that are thinking about all people, that is fine to me. But we're talking about people who hang out with extremists, right? We're talking about people who went to Mercy Culture to get their blessing. Right, that's what Tim O'Hare did, who took Tim Dunn and Ferris Wilkes dollars. He's received over $200,000 from their campaigns. This guy is now running the county, which is the size of some states and has the 12th largest city. And he can really do damage to our city's success. And I'm sorry, but I think our city council and our mayor has to do more to stand up against Tim O'Hare, or it's going to continue to cess over into our own politics. And so
It's that whole uncompromising way of governing. I mean, the list in this article of the things that he has done, from, cutting back on voting, making changes that specifically help one party over another, cutting funding for residents that are low income, taking away free bus rides for low income residents to vote, cutting back programs that help vulnerable populations, prohibiting outside organizations from registering voters in county buildings. I mean, just the list goes on and on. Targeting youth groups that, like I said, help vulnerable populations, offering programs that help young people be successful.
yeah, the election integrity unit stuff that
Has resulted in no violations.
it received 82 complaints of voter fraud, or about 0.009% of all votes cast in the 2020 presidential election. None had resulted in criminal charges. We're spending money there. You talk about the money that we're spending. We didn't even talk about the $3.5 million has gone out to families who were misrepresented in the Tarrant County Jail. If you collected all the money that Tim O'Hare and Bill Waybourn has spent to fight their agendas, I would argue that the budget is bigger than Fort Worth economic development budget to recruit businesses. Guys, we are not a big city. We are still too held on our good old boy, let's hide everything under the rug. Fort Worth's a happy place. We have to be keeping awareness and accountability at the highest level. Because other important things are going to be discussed. 2027 is a Tim O'Hare. It's not just Tim O'Hare we're going to have. The CCPD funding is up in 2027. These things have to be talking about a new message and meaning for what it means to have a police represent a majority minority city. What does that look like with the lack of mental health services? All those things, we have to start now keeping this man accountable. And I guess this is a good time for me to talk about what I think you and I and other people are talking about doing. And that is, we want to announce that, like, we call this the 817 podcast. We believe that we need to have more physical spaces to have these conversations as progressives and as people who want to make a difference in this county and in this city. So we would like to let you guys know that we are starting 817 Gather. And the 817 Gather will be, what we're going to try to do is a monthly gathering of people who want to talk about hard things in Fort Worth and see what we can do. So our first 817 Gather will be November 17th. You can ask to be invited. We're going to keep it small at first. And so we are sending out invitations to some people we would like to be there. But if you would like to be a part of some of the first 817 Gathers, there's going to be a link in the description. Hit the link. It will it will give us your information, and we will give you the time and the location. Because honestly, the way that we got to creating the 817 Gather, how long have we been talking about making some type of physical event?
I don't even remember. Somebody asked me the other day how long I've been doing the podcast, and I couldn't even remember that.
Yeah, it's been a while.
So it has. I should probably keep track of that so that we can celebrate anniversaries.
Yeah. And yeah, so for the 817,
I think more and more you and I have both been running into people out in our daily lives who are really connecting with what we do and talk about here, and are kind of communicating with us more. And it has led us to believe that bringing us all together to talk would be a positive go forward for us. I think that, you're note earlier when I was saying that we needed to kind of bash people about the head and shoulders and encourage them to wake up and pay attention. You said, now, Anne, remember, the people who do listen to us are probably the people who are already doing that. And so I think the reminder is to, spread the word to other folks and not be complacent and not doing something, as my father-in-law used to say, do something.
Yeah, and so the 817 Gather, like really what the whole goal of the environment is, like too much of the environments that want to talk about the tough issues are just too influenced by the traditional Fort Worth way. And often that equates to seeking comfort and maintaining the status quo. And so we need a space that we believe shows up differently, that disrupts the hidden power structures, like what's going on in our police culture. But also because the people in power, even though they try to create the space, they hold the strings to the financial, social, and intellectual capital of our city. So like the 817 Gather is a place that we want to curate inclusive environment for progressive and diverse citizens that feel acknowledged, empowered, and hopeful about the transformation and possibilities in the city and in the county. And so the 817 Gather's piloted gathering will be November 17th. And if you want to be a part of it, please RSVP to show your interests. What's funny is I remember this really starting because I was getting worked up about Mercy Culture, and, I'm still worked up that Mercy Culture was able to take a random real estate investor and they were able to get more votes than Ann Zeta. I'm still bitter about that. And so I remember seeing
I'm trying to let that go.
I know, but what did I tell you? I was like, I realized what we don't have. We need to start a church. And so I was like, no, really though. Why should white nationalists only be the people to have the respect to have gatherings? And like, why should the only people who can get together on Sundays are Christians and religious people that all want to mobilize for Republican agendas? The problem is that progressives don't mobilize and gather together because we are all very different religious views.
We're like a big tent.
Yeah, we're a big tent, and we all are really, really weird and awkward. So we like to sit in our own houses and read books and read blogs, but never come together. And so if Republicans are using churches to gather, we need to create a space to gather. And that's hopefully what the 817 Gather is to get us to just start building real community and relationships and trust with one another and mobilizing, because there's a ton of great organizations that are doing the work. I never want to believe that me and Ann, we have time to give our Sundays to talk about the problems, but there are some real people doing the work. And we would love all those people to give us guidance on what to talk about, what to talk to our listeners about, what to do in the city. So we're really excited for it. We're having other people participate and be involved in it. It's just not me and Ann. And so hopefully we just can use this as a launch pad to go from a virtual community to physical spaces.
Yeah.
Cool. So that kind of put a good bow on the big story.
Yeah,
like it
a
was
very
like
positive ending. I like that.
Yeah, so that was nice. So let's go ahead and move into our wins and losses.
So, like we usually do, we start with our losses so that we can end on a win. Although I think that end of that big story was definitely a win. My loss is that there has been, after all of the positivity about rail that we had in our third short story, and transportation and regionalism, and how the region seems to be coming together in a more positive way about trying to figure out ways for folks to get around other than driving, DART seems to be, which is Dallas Area Rapid Transit, seems to be like under fire from many of the communities that have funded it throughout the years, with some of these communities starting to question whether they should continue to fund it. And this is the exact wrong time to be doing that. We are growing like gangbusters. I've always been envious of Dallas side of the Metroplex for the extra funding that they have had and their ability to have all the light rail that they have and to service all those different communities with transit. There's a local organization that is called Data, Riding with Data, and we can share their Instagram, but they are definitely going to all these meetings where this conversation is happening about maybe we should reduce the amount of funding that we put towards Dallas Area Rapid Transit. And like I said, we should be doing the exact opposite of that. The positive is there's folks that believe in that and are going around trying to educate folks. about the importance of funding transit and not defunding transit. And so that's a positive, but the negative is that there's some folks running around as if we should not be funding transit. And some of their concerns are definite concerns, like safety on public transportation, uptick of people experiencing homelessness being on transit, and that making people less comfortable riding transit. All of those things are not reasons to not have transit. In fact, all of those things will get worse without transit because transit provides connectivity for folks that can't afford to drive. So we need to attack the actual problems, not part of the solution to those problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, let's just say I'm glad we don't got that mayor. That's all I'm saying. Like, there needs to be some more advocating the support DART and all that stuff going on over there. But it also gives us a foresight to maybe if Fort Worth is going to be the person working with transit and be more proactive. Maybe we can lead, my loss, and man, this has been a hard one for me. And I bet there's a lot of, it could be a lot of maybe men or capitalistic forward people who identify as entrepreneurs. I'm an entrepreneur. I run my own company. I've been running my own company for 12 years. We have 20 full-time, couple hundred 1099s who work with us and what we do. And I was always inspired by Elon Musk. I genuinely believe that he has done so much for humanity. And, I think that I had to come to the realization in my own reality about Elon Musk that he is just an evil, awful person. And I don't know if you've ever had someone that you really, really looked up to when you were a kid or, and you found out who they really were and it just really rocked you. I just feel like I think that like anyone who when the richest man in the world and now capitalism, goes with the Donald Trump and all that he's doing. I don't know if you guys saw this story. I sent it from the Wall Street Journal. But Elon Musk plans to award $1 million a day to a randomly chosen voter who has signed his petition pledging to uphold the rights to free speech and to bear arms. The effort is to boost voter registration, and he is looking to basically pay people to vote, which is not only not allowed, but it's also he is actively living in Pennsylvania. He and Trump are talking on a regular basis. It's just sad that, Trump is so powerful that not only did he hack the Republicans, he's now have hacked the capitalist. And for someone who believes in capitalism, that there is possibility to use capitalism in a right way, and also to use it to change the world like Elon Musk has, it just hurts me to see that the leader of what it means to live the American dream and chase innovation to succumb to become, if Trump does win, we are creating the Russian history where that is Putin and Elon is the oligarch. And that is crushing to what it means to have American capitalism. We do not want to be Russian capitalists. And my loss is that Elon is trying to become one. All right, so let's go ahead and move the wins. I'll go my win so we can end on your win. My win is an update on Mercy Culture. Shout out to the Oakhurst neighborhood. Oakhurst neighborhood has hired a lawyer to represent them at the zoning meeting.
I think they voted to fund hiring an attorney to represent them and it's not an attorney for a lawsuit or anything like that. It's just to represent them as the proposal goes through the zoning commission and the city council.
Yeah. And I think the win for me there is this is an example. I am, Ann has a clear resume of caring about Fort Worth. I was just a guy who was someone needs to be talking about this. And for the last 3.5 years, that's all I've been doing. And now people want me to be on panels to talk about Fort Worth like I know something. No, I just cared. And I had the space to do something. And it's cool to see citizens in the neighborhood care and say, you know what? We can stand up to the things we don't want. And so I think it's a win because it's just common people in their neighborhood who doesn't want this extreme church to boss them around and bully them around. And please, Fort Worth Republicans, take example of what these neighborhoods are doing on how you don't have to succumb to extremism, and let's stand up to this toxicness. Like, this is a clear way of, I think, like, we can stand up. And so I hope all the best. I don't know what's going to come out. I don't know what's going to end up, but it just makes me proud to see that there is a community coming together, and that there's a neighborhood group that's strong enough to say, hey, we're going to try to do something.
I mean, it's the public process for those kind of cases. So I think that everybody deserves to be heard. I don't know. There was a couple things that came out about whether or not that this is an actual zoning change or whether it's just a site plan to allow a use. I think that the complication of religious, freedom and what people can do is probably going to be challenging to overcome. But I think that the concerns that are being expressed are definitely things that need to be aired in public.
Yeah. Cool. Well, what is your win?
So my win is kind of the opposite of, we were talking about how some of our elected officials are uncompromising and only want to represent one side and not the other. But my win is that both the Star-Telegram and the Dallas Morning News have endorsed Colin Allred in the upcoming race for Senate. And those articles are both there. And I think that what they point out to is that Allred has campaigned for Senate for more than a year as a bipartisan lawmaker willing to compromise, recognize the nuances, and is ready to serve as a bridge between our polarized tribes in a time when politics is stuck in a partisan rut. So that is someone that I think we should all be excited about representing us. And I think that that has been signaled by both the Star-Telegram and the Dallas Morning News endorsing him.
So, obviously, if this didn't fire you up to go vote, I don't know,
If anybody needs a ride, give me a call.
Yeah, exactly.
I'll be around.
Yes.
Since we don't have free buses anymore.
Yes.
Actually, I think someone did step in to cover that. And so Trinity Metro, I think, stepped up and are doing that, even though the county may not be doing it anymore.
Yeah. So, we'll see what happens. This will be we will not be coming together next week because I'll be out of town, but then we'll have a show for you that will come out November 4th, pre the results, because November 3rd is a Sunday. And so we'll record then. And then we'll be able to do that. And then we'll record the following to really then decide how we're going to all be on that next Sunday. But yeah, so 817 Gather, sign up, come join us. Let's talk. Let's change and support the future of our county and city. And we would love to have you at the 817 Gather, and we appreciate you listening to the 817 podcast.
Yep. I think the 817 Gather can move us towards that, making Arts Goggle Fort Worth be everyday Fort Worth.
Come on.